At the time, I was running the online news operation for Forbes.com.
I was an editor here and writer.
I was assistant managing editor.
I was the managing editor of American Heritage magazine, the magazine of American history, which Forbes owned.
I think I was then an associate editor.
I've been working at Forbes and really in journalism for about a year as covering future technology.
I was a staff writer for the magazine.
It was such a beautiful day, and it put you in such a good mood as you stepped out of your house and you stepped off the subway. Every day that there's one like that in New York City, which are not that many, I remember 9/11.
Cloudless, painfully blue sky, a little chill in the air, a hint of autumn, absolutely stunning. And as usual, walking down Fifth Avenue, you see the towers in the background. They're like a part of familiar furniture in a room that you just know are there. And I got to work probably about 8 o'clock early in the morning.
And I walked into the building, and I was one of the first people there. It was probably around 8:30, 8:45, and I remember the security guards were kind of a buzz about something, but I just kept on walking.
Visiting that Tuesday was our bureau chief, Mark Taggi, who perhaps about 8:15 was chatting and disappeared, and then came back and was very flustered. And he said, "You've got to come outside." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because something's happened." I went downstairs and stood right outside the Forbes building and could see that there was a fire in some of the top floors of what apparently was the North Tower.
I remember looking up at the building, and this is the kind of weird thing about when something so bizarre like that happens. I live downtown, so I know how big those buildings are. And anything that could have made a hole that big wasn't a small little propeller plane, which you assume when you look up and you say, oh, you know, something just went amiss with some, you know, single engine kind of plane. Well, of course, it was a massive hole in a massive building, but your brain doesn't want to go there.
I turned to my left, and the guy next to me, a tall African-American gentleman, said, "I work on the 104th floor. I'm late for work. Otherwise I would be up there."
We went inside. I turned on a television monitor that was right outside my office, and which automatically went to New York 1. And they were trained on it. And almost within a minute, I would say, of just, again, watching from a distance on the TV monitor, the second plane hit.
And then all of a sudden there was this huge flash, and it looked, I mean, almost movie set-esque in a way. And there was a sort of unreality to the dimensions of things.
Second plane came from the south, and the explosion came out toward us, because we were looking south, obviously. And at that point, I just made a mad dash for Forbes, which is only a block away.
There were hundreds of people standing stock still, staring at the World Trade Center towers, both of them burning.
Like that, and everything changed. And people, you know, just sitting, you know, these people that were sitting at their desk at Cantor, like, you know, 1 minute having their bagel or coffee, and the next holding the hand of a coworker and jumping out of 110 stories.
And I remember talking to my mom at some point, and she said, "You've got to go get cash, you have to go get money." And walking out into the streets on 13th Street, and Fifth Avenue was empty with a bunch of people crowded around the middle. There were no cars anywhere, and everyone was just looking up at the towers burning. And we stood there for I don't know how long, and all of a sudden one of them just collapsed before our eyes.
You know, they just collapsed so straight, and that last little radio antenna just kind of going down.
I do remember that afternoon, obviously after the buildings had fallen and everything had happened, and I knew I wasn't going back to my apartment anytime soon. I had to go I had to go get some clothes. I had to somehow figure out, well, what are we going to do for the next many weeks? Who knew at that point, right? So I still remember walking to 6th Avenue. It was like a ghost town in a zombie movie. To 6th Avenue. There's a Today's Man at 24th to 25th Street. And I walked in, and there was someone running the register, and then one person working the floor in this big retail store. And they just kind of had this hollowed out look, and I'm sure I did too, and I was the only person in there. And I walked in, and they looked at me, and I looked at them, and I said, I recall this perfectly, and I said, I guess I need some pants. And then we all just started crying our eyes out. Obviously very strange.
So for me, the journalistic thing kicked on very, very quickly, and it was a very good way of sort of you don't have to feel it as much if you're analyzing it, I suppose, and you can put off that sort of thing, and you're so busy, and that being that busy is actually a really good thing.
I remember that David Dukovich, who was the other junior staff writer there, was hunched over his computer with both the top editor, who was Paul Maitman at the time, and Michael Knorr standing over him, editing as he typed. And no one really knew exactly what had happened.
It was one of those moments in your life when you think, why am I a business journalist? I want to be out there. I want to be covering the scenes. And I remember people all kind of trying to find ways that they could be part of it, because as a journalist you wanted to be, part of the coverage.
There were news events that I wish I'd covered better around that time and just wasn't focused. I mean, there were things going on in the biotech industry then.
I wasn't thinking about the business of journalism at all. I wasn't thinking about who I should talk to and how they were feeling and what was going on.
And yet there was this feeling that the show must go on. And I did feel a little ambivalent about it. I did feel like we should have just kind of packed up and all gathered around and shared stories or talked or something to understand what was going on, but it was clearly communicated that we needed to stay focused and keep going, and we did.
We convened and we kicked stories around, trying to imagine at that point what New York and the nation might look like 3 weeks later. And obviously we didn't keep all the ideas that we generated that day, but we managed to come up with this here, Life During Wartime, and I'm still very proud of that issue.
For several weeks there was an acrid smell in the air after that of burning, and burning unnatural things like plastic that kept the tragedy physically with you, right in the air you breathed for weeks on end.
I do remember the smell. It was horrific. It was a combination of fire and ash and death. It just really smelled like death with some sort of toxic fumes mixed in, and it was horrifying.
After the smell of it all finally ebbed, I mean, it takes a long time to, we left the window open in our apartment, and a lot of that stuff blew in there, so it was kind of months of getting back to any feeling of normalcy, or you didn't feel like you were in a war zone down there.
It's just, it was one of those moments of living through history, and you couldn't quite believe what you were seeing, and you were trying to process exactly the devastation and what it meant and what was going on.
I do think about those towers. And whenever I think about those towers, I think about the fact that there is still very little that has replaced them.
I still look down Fifth Avenue or 7th Avenue and think about what's missing. The city and the people in it have shown enormous resilience, and that's all around us, but I do still look down there and keep seeing what isn't there.
2 days before 9/11, I had a friend of mine who actually lived on a sailboat across over by the Colgate Clock in Jersey City. And on that Sunday night, which was a beautiful night, we were on his boat, bobbing off of the Statue of Liberty, looking at Wall Street, and even though none of us made a whole lot of money, we felt like kings, staring at that cityscape. And still to this day, when I look at it, I still see those towers there.